I was once a gentle mother, until that night. The night my husband died in our seaside mansion, and the one who killed him was the very person I trusted the most, my daughter-in-law. 20 years have passed. Everyone believed it was an accident, but I chose silence, swallowing my pain whole, not out of weakness, but to prepare for this day. I've lived like a ghost in that old house, waiting for the moment the traitor would let her guard down. They thought I was fragile, old, powerless to fight back, but their greatest mistake was underestimating me. Today, I'll tell you how I unearthed a case that everyone thought was buried, how a mother delivered justice for the man she loved, and made a murderer kneel before the truth. This isn't just a revenge story. It's the journey of a betrayed heart, turning into a blade of ice. And if you think time can hide every crime, you're wrong. That winter, the sea wind seeped icy through every crack of the old seaside mansion. The waves pounding offshore sounded like the heavy breathing of a memory I have not forgotten for 20 years. People say time heals all wounds, but some wounds never heal. They only lie dormant, like a chained beast waiting for the moment to rise. I, Maria, 65 years old, live alone in this house. Everyone thinks I'm just a widowed old woman, weak, lonely, resigned. They don't know that behind these cold walls a storm of hatred has been waiting for 2 decades. From the second-floor window I look out at the sea. Night blankets the water, and the white-crested waves crash on the rocks as if trying to tear apart the silence that hangs over this place. The shabby mansion stands alone on a high cliff, and whenever the wind blows, the roof tiles moan softly, like a soul never granted release. The villagers avoid this place since that tragic night, the night my husband died. They call this the House of Ghosts, and I don't bother to correct them. Sometimes silence is the best armor to hide fury. In the sitting room, the old clock on the wall still ticks steadily. I have heard that sound for 40 years, from the days the house overflowed with laughter until it became a tomb of memories. Each tick reminds me that time does not erase the truth. It only pushes it down, waiting for a hand cold enough to pull it up. That hand is mine. I walk slowly down the long corridor where family photographs still hang on the wall. In those photos, I am a happy wife, beside a composed husband and our small children. My eyes in the picture shine. My eyes now have long been cold. I stop before the single photograph that includes my daughter-in-law, the woman who 20 years ago took everything I once loved. She smiles there, gentle, composed, a smile everyone believed belonged to a perfect woman. But I know that behind that smile are the talons of a serpent.
The night my husband died, the whole house was chaos. They said he slipped down the stairs, an unfortunate accident. No one asked questions. No one suspected. Only I stood there, silently staring at the bloodstains spreading across the cold stone floor. Deep within my soul I knew that death was not an accident. It was a knife plunged straight into my heart, but I had no proof, no voice, nothing but a shattered heart. I buried that truth for 20 years, like burying a corpse in frozen earth. People thought I had forgotten, but the truth is, I remember every detail of that night. Hurried footsteps, a door closing softly, the faint perfume lingering on the stair banister. That perfume was not mine. It belonged to her, the one who entered my family like an angel and became a demon in the dark. 20 years passed and I became a quiet old mother. I tended the garden, swept the house, cooked alone. I sat by the window every evening, like someone waiting for a miracle that never came. They pitied me, thinking I had no life left, no future.
But inside me a fire burned low, day after day, month after month, year after year. I never forgot. I only waited for the right moment. Each night, when everything was quiet, I opened the old wooden cupboard under the staircase. Inside, I kept an old notebook, an audio tape, a few yellowed papers. These things that seemed meaningless were the only clues left of the truth. I was not in a hurry. Revenge is not impulse. Revenge is a game of chess, and I am the most patient player. I remember clearly the first time my daughter-in-law stepped into this house. She looked at me with bright, shining eyes and called me mother in a voice so sweet it chilled me. Everyone praised her as clever, beautiful, gentle. I believed it too, until everything shattered. She didn't just take my husband, she took my trust, my family, my future. Now this mansion is only mine, but that does not make me weak. On the contrary, it makes me more dangerous than ever. I have learned to hide, to listen, to make those who think themselves safe tremble when the truth awakens. Outside, the wind whistles through the cracks. A winter storm is coming. I stand in the dark, my hand lightly touching the stair railing where he fell years ago. Everything remains the same, only I am different. I am no longer the grieving woman I once was. I am the one who will rewrite the ending of this story. Did you think you escaped? I whisper into the night. The sea wind plays through my silver hair, carrying the salty scent, the scent of time, of waiting, of an unkept vow. I close my eyes and listen to the waves striking the rocks. In the darkness, I smile, a cold smile I've never shown anyone. Because now, the game is about to begin, and the one who once thought she had won will soon learn what it means to pay. This winter will no longer be silent. This will be the winter of truth, of justice, and of revenge. The sea wind that night was so cold I felt invisible fingers tightening around my throat. The salty scent, the low roar of the waves, the wind scraping the creaking roof tiles, all of it seemed to whisper a secret buried too long. I closed the second-floor window and looked into the thick darkness of the old house. In the dark, memories do not vanish. They only wait for a crack to spill back in. And tonight, that crack has opened. I turned and walked down the long corridor. My feet unconsciously halted at the stone stair where everything began. The place where my life veered into a dark, roadless path. 20 years ago, right here, my husband died. That day the sky was leaden with rain. The heavens seemed draped in mourning cloth. People ran in panic through the house, cries, shouts, the sound of shoes slipping on wet stone, all blending into a dirge. He fell from the second floor, his head striking the step with force. Blood poured from his temple, spreading into a long stain like a wound that would never close. I rushed forward and held the cooling body of the man who had walked nearly half a life with me. In that moment, I felt the world crumble. But beneath the pain was something else, a cold sensation crawling down my spine. Because I knew he did not fall by himself. They called it an accident. The police closed the case quickly, slipped, no signs of struggle, no clear traces. Simply a tragic fall. My family accepted it. The neighbors nodded. The whole village turned away, as if the death of a successful man were nothing more than a passing breeze. Only I stood motionless above the red smear on the steps, listening to the rain and knowing the truth had been buried alive. I remember that moment vividly. In the chaos, I looked up at the second-floor railing, where the chandelier still swung gently, and an unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air. That perfume did not belong to me. It belonged to her, the daughter-in-law I had trusted, That night she was the last person on the second floor with him, but when the police arrived, she stood trembling beside me, her face streaked with tears, holding me as a daughter-in-law mourning her father-in-law. The whole family believed her, only I did not. I looked straight into her eyes. Behind the veil of tears was a coldness like steel, something no one else saw but me. A gaze devoid of pain, filled only with control. When she squeezed my hand and said, "Mother, it was just an accident, just an accident," I knew that woman had won the first move in the game. After the funeral, laughter left this house. My children fractured, each going their own way. One buried himself in work to forget the pain. Another left the village because he could not bear the atmosphere of mourning. As for me, I stayed, confronting the cold emptiness every night. But that emptiness did not weaken me. It nourished in me an obsession that would not relent, to find the truth. I watched everything quietly. I observed how she slowly stepped into the center of the family. She cried, embraced my children, comforted me, arranged the funeral with flawless care like the perfect daughter-in-law. But that perfection was the mask that made people forget she had been the last one with him. The police filed the report. The law fell silent. Friends drifted away. Family began to live on, as if my husband's death were merely a sorrowful chapter. But I could not. Each night, when everyone slept, I sat alone on the wooden chair by the window, looking out over the dark sea and hearing the waves howl like my own heart. I remember clearly what I heard that night. After the loud fall came a silence so chilling, then the sound of light footsteps gliding along the corridor, quick, precise, efficient. The wind howling through the cracks blended with those steps like a whisper. "No one will believe you." I also remember the little things no one noticed. The bracelet she had been wearing that night gone missing, a faint scrape on the stair banister, a corner of paper blurred by water under a step. These fragments were not enough to press charges, but enough for me to know I was not mad. The truth lay there, merely waiting for time to reveal it. In the years since, she lived a perfect life, wealthy, powerful, loved by my children, respected by everyone. And I became a quiet old mother, living in the house everyone feared. People thought I was depressed, senile, delusional. I let them think so. In this game, I did not need them to believe me. I only needed them not to notice me. Every time I saw her enter the house with that false smile, calling me mother so sweetly, my heart constricted, but I still smiled back. I learned to smile like the harmless woman. I learned to hide my hatred behind gentle eyes. I learned to live with the darkness, like a beast lying in wait inside its den. 20 years, a span long enough for a person to change, long enough for everyone to forget, long enough for the culprit to sleep peacefully in the illusion of victory. But I never forgot. I do not need the law. I do not need anyone's help. I will personally overturn this game. I once asked myself, what turns a gentle mother into someone willing to take revenge? The answer is simple. When someone robs you of what you love most, you are no longer yourself. You become something else, colder, more enduring, more dangerous. I stand on the stairs and lightly touch the cold stone step. Outside, the winter storm is beginning to roll in. The waves lash fiercely. Wind howls through the old wall cracks. I close my eyes and hear the rain from that night 20 years ago blending with the waves today. All of it reminds me that that darkness never left. It only waits for me to open the door. I whisper, the day will come. No more trembling, no more tears, only the voice of a woman ground to stone by time and pain. And so, as winter cloaks the old house once again, the darkness of the past returns, clear, fierce, vivid, as if that night had never ended. This is no longer pain. This is the beginning of a plan, a revenge nurtured in silence for 20 years.
It all began on that gloomy afternoon when autumn leaves fell in showers onto the stone path leading to the mansion gate. After burying the past under layers of time for 20 years, that rusty iron gate opened once more, bringing back memories locked in my heart. Memories I thought I had forgotten, but which had only been sleeping, waiting for the day to wake. I remember that morning clearly. A strange silence hung over the entire house. Since he died, I had never again heard my children's laughter echo here. No running footsteps along the corridor, no soft music from the sitting room like before. Only the pendulum clock sounded heavy beats. Then a letter from the lawyer arrived, an invitation for the children to gather and discuss the estate and the ancestral mansion. I knew that when that letter was opened, it would not be just negotiations. It would be the return of wounded souls, lies, and greed. That afternoon, a light rain fell unexpectedly, like a warning. The first black car turned into the yard. David, my eldest son, stepped out, suit neat, watch gleaming, his gaze cold as steel. He had become a successful man, but he was also the first to leave this house without a proper farewell. I saw estrangement in his eyes, as if this house no longer belonged to him. The second car arrived shortly after. Linda, my only daughter. She still carried that haughty air, still walked in high heels, head held as if the world lay beneath her feet. But I saw a crack in those eyes, fragments of untold secrets. She did not come back for love, she came for advantage. And finally Mark, the youngest, the one who had promised to stay by me, yet the very one who abandoned me when I was weakest. Mark stood on the porch, looking around the house as if everything were unfamiliar. But I know well, within him, each corner of the wall and every hung photograph is an indelible memory. They returned not to reunite, but to count every brick, every inch of land of this mansion. I stood on the second-floor balcony, once my husband's room, and looked down at my 3 children. The pale yellow hallway light washed my face, casting a long distorted shadow across the floor. In that moment, my heart pounded, not with joy at reunion, but because the long, smoldering fire within me was beginning to stir. "Hello, Mother." David spoke first. His voice was calm, as if this were merely a polite meeting. Linda only gave a slight taunting smile, while Mark avoided my gaze. My 3 children, my blood and flesh, yet the 3 pieces of a picture of betrayal. They entered the house. No one mentioned the past. No one mentioned his death. No one mentioned the fateful night 20 years ago when a gunshot rang out in the rainy night, and I stood there, powerless, watching the man I loved collapse. All they talked about was value, ownership, and sell or keep. I was silent, pouring tea for each of them. My gaze lingered on Linda, the daughter who once held my hand and vowed to always protect me. Yet she was the one who signed the papers to sell all our assets while I lay ill in bed. She did not know that from that moment, half of my heart died. David began the negotiation like discussing an investment. "We cannot keep an old, decaying house just for memories. Mother should rest. Take the money to travel or to a retirement home. This is a good opportunity." Linda smiled lightly, her eyes passing over me like a thin blade. "David is right. We can't live in the past forever." Mark remained silent, but his silence was not innocent. I understood he was calculating. They thought I was old. They thought I was weak. They thought I no longer had the strength to stand against them. But they did not know. For 20 years I had lived with a single purpose, waiting for this day.
I tapped the wooden table lightly.
The dry sound echoed through the room and halted their words.
"This house," I said, my voice low and slow, "is not something for you to bargain over." David frowned. Linda gave a faint, cold smile. Mark looked up, somewhat embarrassed. I looked at each of my children, at every face I had given life to and raised, and each of them had played a part in the tragedy of my life. The chandelier swung slightly, casting my shadow across the long table. My shadow split into 3 branches, like 3 blades pointing at them. Inside me, a plan that had been long formed was waking. "Do you know," I said quietly, "some debts are not paid with money. They are paid with the truth." The room grew chilly. No one understood what I was hinting at, but I knew that the moment I touched the door to the past, everything would collapse like a paper castle. Outside, the rain began to fall in heavier sheets. Thunder rolled like triumphant drums.
That night was not just a family meeting. It was the beginning of a revenge game I had prepared for 20 years. And I, the gentle mother I once was, had long since vanished. In her place stood a woman with a vow in her heart. "I will make each one of you pay, one by one." When the sound of the night rain still echoed softly on the roof, and the silhouettes of my children disappeared behind the rusted gate, I knew the time had come to unlock the doors I had sealed shut for 20 long years. After that seemingly harmless family meeting, where they spoke of money and ownership with their polished smiles, I returned to the study, the place where I'd hidden many things, mementos, letters, and fragments of a life worn down by time. I stepped into the room, where the dim yellow light trembled as if afraid to shine directly on my face. On the old wooden shelf sat a small drawer that had always remained closed, where my husband kept the secrets he didn't want anyone to find. For the first time in 2 decades, I pulled out the key I had carried like a silent vow and opened it. Inside was the scent of old paper, ink, and dust. Inanimate things, yet unbearably heavy, because they held an entire lifetime. I searched slowly, my fingers brushing past the spine of one book to another, until I stopped at a small fabric-bound journal, its color long faded. My husband's handwriting was unmistakable, sometimes firm, sometimes as soft as a string pulled taut. I remembered him sitting at that desk at night, bathed in the warm glow of the oil lamp, writing silently as though confiding in someone who could never answer back. I hadn't opened this journal since the night he died. When my trembling fingers touched its cover, my heartbeat pounded as if trying to break free. On the first page, the ink had faded, but the words were clear. March 12th. They began talking about the villa. A short line, but it burned like an ember. I turned another page, then another. The journal wasn't just his daily musings. It was a web of codes, initials, and cryptic numbers. There were entries marked only with letters: L, D, M. No names, just shadows. But the more I read, the more they started to take shape. L appeared at 9:30 p.m. Hands smelled like perfume. Small box missing. Money transferred, check ledger. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Those fragments were puzzle pieces, and I, who had spent a lifetime beside him, could start to fit them together. L could be Linda. D could be David. M could be Mark. Or something else entirely. I didn't rush. Every page I turned was like reopening an old wound. Painful, but necessary. He had written about arguments over papers and the will. He mentioned an unsigned letter sealed with a lipstick stain. "It feels scripted," he wrote. Tucked between the pages was a faded receipt, a wire transfer to A.R. Jewelry,
dated shortly before his death. I remembered us talking about a gift, but not one worth that much. Who signed it? Who received it? Why did he write it down with a question mark? Then I saw the page that made my throat tighten. November 23rd. He called that night.
Breathless. Said, "If they find out, everything will collapse." I asked who. He closed his eyes, said, "Can't say on the phone. Come home."
November 23rd. The night of the shooting. The night everything shattered. He had known something. He had tried to tell me, but he died before he could finish his sentence. I flipped faster now, as if I could catch the words he never said. One page had been ripped out, violently. The tear cut through the middle of a conversation, and near the torn edge, ink had bled like water or tears had soaked it. Someone had tried to erase the truth. My fingertips traced the jagged edge, and the quiet storm of fury rose in me. At the end of the journal he had written, "Numbers don't lie." Dates, times, names, find the source. I closed the journal as if sealing a door that had just been pried open. But closing it didn't mean burying it. My heart was now flashing red with warning. This was the first piece of the puzzle, a piece that whispered. His death was no accident. Someone's hand, someone close, had pushed it all into motion. In the nights that followed, I spent sleepless hours cross-referencing the journal with every memory I could summon. Dates, conversations, careless remarks. A single initial kept appearing, N. Alongside it, perfume, stair creak, scratch on railing. I didn't make accusations, not yet. But every clue pointed in one direction. Someone in this house had lied. The journal didn't just expose betrayal, it also whispered his love. Among the tangled codes and suspicions were fragments of tenderness, walks at dusk, meals he loved, little memories he'd tucked away. They burned into me, soft and sharp at once. He had once held my hand in the rain and promised to protect this family. I hugged the journal to my chest as if holding him again, then let go with a newfound icy resolve. I would not let him be silenced. When dawn crept through the curtains, my mind was clear.
The journal was only the beginning. I would need more: bank records, receipts, statements, and above all, proof. Proof that would tear away their masks. I knew they would deny it, destroy evidence, maybe even threaten me. But I had waited 20 years. I had learned how to live in the shadows long enough to drag their lies into the light. I set the journal on the desk, not back into the drawer, where I could see it, where it could remind me of why I started. The first piece was in place. The game had begun. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and opened them with a smile that held no warmth. It was not the smile of forgiveness. It was the smile of someone who has already chosen vengeance. That night, I barely slept. The dim light from the hallway lamp fell across the diary in my hands, casting restless shadows like the breath of the past. Every word my husband wrote, 20 years ago, came alive again, hanging over the traitors like a suspended verdict. I closed the diary, sat by the window, and stared out at the sea. The waves rolled on indifferently, unaware that inside this house, a storm was quietly rising. By morning, when the cold winter sunlight slipped through the cracks of the window, I knew what I had to do. The truth never reveals itself. It must be dragged out, layer by layer, until there's nowhere left to hide. And to do that, I had to start from the closest place of all, my own family. I gave birth to and raised 3 children. I once knew the sound of every breath, every step they took. I was their refuge when they stumbled, the one who absorbed all their pain and broken pieces. But now, when I look at them, I no longer see my children. I see 3 adults with secrets, calculations, and one of them had once betrayed. My first target was David, my eldest son. From childhood, David was my pride. Intelligent,
capable, always calm in a storm. When his father died, it was David who took control of the family business, helping his siblings survive the darkest days. He was the man of the house. I trusted him so deeply, I never questioned a thing. Until I read my husband's diary. His name appeared often in those pages. There's a hole in the finances. David is hiding something. Those words froze my heart. Back then, David had just started his career, yet suddenly had a large sum of money. I brushed it off, thinking he'd made a lucky investment. But piecing the memories together now, I realized that was the exact time my husband died. I began watching David, not as a mother, but as a hunter. Every word, every gesture he made when he came home that night, I carved into memory. His eyes didn't waver when we mentioned his father, as if that wound had long healed, or worse, had never existed. I dug through old files, bank receipts, forgotten papers. In the basement was a steel chest where my husband kept his most important documents. When I opened it, the envelopes were yellowed, but the numbers on them remained sharp. Large sums of money were transferred just days before he died. The recipient's name: David. I sat alone in that cold room, clutching the papers until my fingertips went numb. I didn't want to believe it, but evidence doesn't lie. The next day, I visited David's office. The towering glass building stood in sharp contrast to the crumbling seaside mansion where I had imprisoned myself for 2 decades. He had a life of wealth and power, but was it built on hard work or betrayal? I walked in like a fragile old woman visiting her son, not a mother digging up the past. David hugged me, spoke gently, asked about my health, but I've lived too long to trust smiles. When I mentioned his father, his eyes flickered, a mere fraction of a second, but enough to reveal a door long sealed shut. "Why are you bringing up old things?" he asked, defensive. "Because old things never truly end," I replied softly. My voice was light as air, but my words struck the surface like stones, sending ripples through his gaze. As I left the office, I knew David was hiding something, and if there was a traitor in this house, their first step must have been money. That night, I returned to my husband's study. On the diary's pages he had written, "He's not evil. He's weak, and weakness can kill." My chest tightened. Maybe David wasn't the mastermind, but that didn't make him innocent. Weakness, silence, and allowing a crime to unfold is still part of the crime. I began testing him with small traps. I feigned forgetfulness, casually mentioning I'd found some old documents. Instantly, David lost his composure. Fear flashed in his eyes. When I asked, "Do you remember the night your father died?" he answered too fast, too rehearsed, as if he'd been preparing that line for 20 years. I traced his financial ties, investments, partners. I uncovered a chain of suspicious transfers going back to the very night of the tragedy. Everything aligned too perfectly, like pieces on a chessboard. But I didn't rush to a conclusion. I've lived long enough to know the true traitor often hides behind the curtain. David might just be the first pawn. And to reach the one pulling the strings, I had to let him fall into the trap himself. From that day on, I no longer saw my son through a mother's eyes. I saw him as a suspect. Every dinner, every phone call, every glance, I peeled back the layers one by one. And strangely, when you start observing with a cold heart, you see things love once blinded you to. One afternoon, I overheard David on the phone in the living room. His voice was low, tense. "She's starting to remember." "No, I didn't say anything. I'll handle it." When I stepped in, he switched tones instantly, forcing a laugh. "Oh, Mom, it's just a business call." I smiled. a smile he couldn't understand. From that moment, I knew darkness surrounded him. Maybe he hadn't killed his father, but he had stood in the shadows when it happened, and that was enough to leave me no way back. In revenge stories, people often say, your greatest enemy isn't a stranger, it's the one you once trusted. For me, the deepest pain is knowing the traitor carries your own blood. I stared out at the night sea, clutching the diary tight. A piece of the truth had surfaced, but this was only the beginning. Inside this house, there were others, and I, a mother who had lost everything, would not stop. Never. After that night, I sat alone in the dark, my husband's diary resting on my lap, heavy like a stone tied to my heart. The faded ink, the sharp, deliberate strokes of his handwriting, reflected exactly who he was. A man who never lied. I read the final page over and over again, where he had written down numbers, secret meetings, and hidden worries. And in the center of it all was the name of my eldest son. A part of me wanted to cry, but another part grew cold, sharp like the blade of a knife. I was no longer the trembling woman from 20 years ago. This time, I held the knife. From that moment on, I knew I couldn't confront them head on. I had lived too long being seen as a frail, forgetful old woman. They thought I was harmless, powerless, and that was exactly how I would trap them. The next morning, as pale sunlight slipped into the living room, I walked down the stairs slowly. My children had already gathered, discussing selling the mansion, their words dressed in polite phrases like fair division of assets, but their eyes, their little glances, were soaked in greed. My eldest wore his usual mask of composure, but I saw the cracks. Cracks only a mother who once held him in her arms could recognize. I began to play my role. Did I forget again? What day is it today? I asked softly, my voice trembling, my eyes dull, as if my mind were fading. They exchanged amused glances. My eldest looked at me the way one looks at a piece of the chessboard already deemed useless. That was the moment I knew I was on the right path. In the days that followed, I set small traps. A bank document accidentally left on the kitchen table. A half-heard conversation through a phone I had forgotten to hang up. An old key reappearing just when they thought it was lost. I didn't attack. I observed. And when you observe long enough, the truth reveals itself in the smallest reflexes. My eldest began to lose his calm. Late-night phone calls multiplied. He would slip out onto the balcony, voice low and urgent. I noted every detail, the way he flinched when I passed by, the flicker of fear in his eyes whenever I mentioned his father at dinner. But I was in no hurry. Revenge isn't something you carry out in rage. It requires the cold patience of someone who's been betrayed and survived. I began to act deeper. Some days I stood in the middle of the stairs, mumbling to myself, making them believe my mind was truly slipping. Sometimes I'd drop a teacup and let them rush to catch me, thinking I was nothing but a burden. I let them believe it. In chess, the underestimated piece is often the most dangerous. I tested my other children, too. When I mentioned their father's old study, a room untouched for 20 years, each reacted differently. One averted their eyes in fear, another pretended indifference. But my eldest, he couldn't hide the tension in his jaw when I said I wanted to clean that room. The innocent don't fear the past. One night, as we sat around the wide kitchen table, I deliberately mixed up my son's name with my husband's. The whole table burst out laughing. I laughed too, but inside, I knew that every laugh would tighten the noose around their necks later. I wouldn't need to scream. I'd let them walk into the trap themselves. In that old mansion, every sound travels far. I started noticing footsteps in the night. There were nights when he stayed up late, rummaging through his father's study, the very room where I had deliberately placed certain things back. Quietly, I was leading him back to the beginning. I was no longer the weak mother. I was the gatekeeper of the past. And the game had officially begun. I walked back to my room and closed the door softly. In the dark, I placed the diary on the table beside an old photograph, a summer day when our family was still whole. I gently traced my fingers over my husband's face. Everything I was about to do was so he could finally rest in peace. I whispered a single sentence, just for myself. Wait for me a little longer. I'll bring the truth home. Outside the window, the sea kept beating against the shore, as if it had been waiting for this moment for 20 years. I lifted my head toward the ceiling. In the thick silence, I could feel it. The traitor in this family was beginning to lose control. I smiled, a cold smile. The revenge had just begun. That night, after my game officially began, the mansion grew taut like a drawn bowstring. I could feel it in the heavy breaths hovering around the dinner table, in the stolen glances flickering through the shadows, and in the way my eldest son was no longer as natural as before. He sensed that something in me was unstable, but he had no idea that I was watching him. Every little move, every flicker of guilt. I thought I would be the only one retracing the secrets buried long ago. But fate, or perhaps the one who had passed, had already set in motion a move I never saw coming. One afternoon, as gray clouds gathered over the sky, the gate bell of the mansion rang. The sound was cold, echoing through the empty house like a warning. I walked slowly to open it. Standing there was an old man, hunched over, holding a frayed hat in his trembling hands. It took me a few seconds to recognize him, our family's loyal butler for nearly 3 decades, the man who had vanished silently after my husband's death. He called me by the intimate name only those from the old days used, Madame Maria. His voice quivered, as if a weight too heavy had pressed on his chest for far too long. I invited him inside. The smell of rain seeped into the air. The living room, usually cold, now felt even more damp and heavy. He sat down in the same old wooden chair where he used to drink coffee with my husband every morning. The image struck my heart like a whisper from the past. Memories surged back like a violent wave. "Did you ever truly believe it was an accident?" he suddenly asked, his cloudy eyes sharp as a blade. I didn't answer. I just gripped the teacup tighter, watching him in silence. That was the very question I had asked myself for 20 years. He inhaled deeply, his voice rough and broken. That night, I was still in the mansion. I never left, no matter what they said. I heard the argument, and the voice wasn't a stranger's. A chill ran down my spine. The room darkened. The ticking of the wall clock grew unnaturally loud and heavy. I whispered, "Who?" He stared at me for a long time, a very long time. In his eyes was a strange storm of emotion, fear, torment, and the weight of a secret too large to bear. It was someone from your own family. I wasn't surprised. Deep down, I had always known. But hearing it from a living witness was like watching an invisible door swing wide open. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was the truth. A truth buried for 20 years. The butler told me that night was rainy, too. The wind howled through the long corridors. He was cleaning in the kitchen when he heard shouting from the study. My husband's voice raised in anger, and another voice, one he knew well. He didn't dare step out for fear of being dragged in, but he remembered every word, every strangled breath of that fight. Then came a loud thud, followed by complete silence. "You know," he said, lowering his eyes, "I can't forget that sound. It wasn't the sound of a normal fall." My heart pounded in my chest. Cold sweat gathered in my palms. For 2 decades I had pieced the puzzle together alone, but now here was the missing piece, the first fragment leading directly to the truth. I asked, "Why did you stay silent all these years?" He sighed, his hands trembling. "Because I was afraid, and because someone found me before the police did. They paid me and told me to disappear. So I left, carrying this secret like a noose around my neck. But now, I can't die with it. I still remember your eyes at the funeral. I knew then that you never believed their lies." I sat still. The distant sound of crashing waves mingled with the rain, a haunting symphony of grief.
He had lived in silence, and I had lived a life torn apart, unheard. But now the past was clawing its way back. Gently, I asked, "Do you remember whose voice it was?" He closed his eyes, nodding slightly. "I do, and I can point them out." At that moment, the chill of truth seeped into my bones. What began as a shadowed game now had a beam of light. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a witness. I had the past on my side. I handed him a warm cup of tea, my gaze no longer soft or fragile. A strange fire burned in me. Sorrow fused with a sharp, steely resolve. He didn't know that his confession tonight was the spark that would set fire to the entire web of lies my children had built for 20 years. Before leaving, he looked at me, his voice hoarse. "Madam Maria, you're not the only one who suffered. Your husband deserves the truth to be spoken." The door closed behind him. The rain still fell hard. I stood alone in the living room, the yellow light casting a cold glow across my face. I didn't tremble anymore. It was time to drag each buried secret into the light, one by one, lie by lie. I raised my eyes to the wedding portrait on the wall. "My love," I whispered softly, "the truth has finally come home to us." And that night, for the first time in 20 years, I no longer felt like a widow trapped in the past. I was the hunter, the one who would begin the chase. A revenge with no way back. The gates of hell had opened. After that night, when the old butler left the mansion, I stood for a long time by the window. Outside, the waves kept whispering against the shore, like thousands of voices rising from the past. What he told me was like a thin blade, piercing into the darkness I had locked away for 20 long years. I once thought I had grown numb to pain, but when the truth returned, it didn't come softly like a breeze. It struck like a storm, merciless and cold. From that night on, I knew I could no longer be the silent, weak mother standing on the sidelines. If I wanted justice for the man who was taken from me, if I wanted to drag the traitor out of hiding, I had to become someone else, a version of myself my children could never imagine. I started with the smallest things. The gentle smiles stayed. The soft words, the frail old woman's facade remained exactly the same. But inside, I was steel. I understood one thing with chilling clarity. My enemies weren't strangers. They were the ones sitting around my family's dinner table, calling me Mother. The next day, I cooked a grand dinner as if it were a warm family gathering. My children, each carrying their own secret agendas, sat around the table, unaware that every glance, every gesture, every flicker of emotion was being watched closely. Every blink, every nervous twitch, every forced smile told me what their words could not. "Do you remember?" I said softly, turning to my eldest. "The night your father died was also a night like this. Rain and thunder." My voice was light,
almost tender. But I saw it. The tiny hesitation in his hand, the quick, instinctive flick of his eyes. That was all I needed. I kept playing my part, the forgetful, fragile mother. They'd grown used to seeing me as nothing more than a relic, a woman trapped in her memories. But behind the gentle smile, I was weaving a web of my own.
I began reconnecting with those who were once loyal to my husband, an old lawyer, a former assistant forced out under suspicious circumstances, and even the elderly neighbor, who had seen far more than she'd told the police. They had been silenced, pushed out of the power game my family played. Time made dull memories, but it can never erase the truth. I didn't tell them everything. I revealed only fragments, just enough to awaken their memories, just enough to make them trust that I was no longer the woman they once pitied. A quiet network began to form, hidden, silent, like a current beneath frozen ice. By day, I was still the mother who cooked, smiled, and walked slowly through the dusty halls of the old mansion. But at night, I sat alone in my late husband's study, the warm light casting shadows over old notes, forgotten financial records, and copies of his will. Every tiny detail, every odd gap, every scribbled line in his notebook became a weapon in my hands. I learned to lie with a gentle voice. I learned to smile when I wanted to scream. I learned to stay silent when rage burned inside me. Their carelessness would be my greatest ally. One evening, I met the old lawyer at a quiet cafe. His eyes widened at the coldness in my voice. "Maria," he whispered, "you're not the same woman you were back then." I replied, "Because back then, I let the man I loved die at the hands of a traitor. This time, I won't let them breathe easy for even a second." The dim light fell across my face, deepening the lines of age. But behind those wrinkles, I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a wolf staring straight into her flock. Back at the mansion, I resumed my role as the gentle mother. When my children asked, "Are you feeling well, Mother?" I smiled softly and said, "I'm old now. How could I hide anything from you?" It was a harmless little line, one that lulled them further into their comfort, made them lower their guard. They didn't know that every move, every quiet plan they thought was hidden, I'd already mirrored it. I began laying my traps, the innocent questions, the subtle mentions of their father's death, the small gestures that drew out their fears. I didn't need to threaten or scream. I just had to watch, and the truth would rise up on its own from the swamp of lies they had built. Late at night, I sat by the fireplace, its flames flickering across my hardened face. 20 years of pain had made me unafraid of the dark, and now, the darkness had become my ally. I whispered to myself, "This is my game, and my children will never know when it began." In the wavering light, I could almost hear my husband's laughter, not warm but cold, complicit, because this revenge was never mine alone. It was ours. And from the shadows, the gentle mother began to transform into a hunter. Silent, patient. No one would escape this web, not a single one. I still remember that night. The rain poured down, and the wind slammed against the old windows like the relentless knocking of a past that refused to disappear. After my conversation with the butler, the man who had witnessed that fateful night, a quiet flame began to burn inside me. The scattered fragments were finally locking into place. Every shadow in my memory, every glance, every movement of my children suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. The time had come. I was no longer the silent mother lurking in the dark. It was time for the traitor to stumble into the trap of their own making. I kept my gentle, fragile facade as I always had, but inside me, a meticulous map of strategies had already been drawn. I knew that if I wanted the truth,
Evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I had to make them turn on each other. Only then would the false mask of unity shatter, revealing the guilty one.
And the first person I aimed at was my eldest child, the one I once trusted more than anyone. He had been my pride, a successful businessman, the one whose voice could calm the entire family. But after reading my husband's journals and hearing the butler's haunting account, everything about him turned murky. So I decided to create a small storm to see who would be swept away first. The next day, I deliberately gathered the whole family for dinner. The air in the grand dining room was as cold as glass. I wore the old black dress, the one from my husband's funeral, to remind them of a past they'd rather forget. At the table I said little. I watched. Every glance, every sound of cutlery on porcelain became a signal. And then I released a single, carefully chosen thread of information. Lately, I found some of your father's old papers. There were some money transfers during the week he died. I didn't speak to one person in particular. I spoke to everyone. But the first to react wasn't the younger ones. It was him, the eldest. His hand faltered for a split second. The knife trembled slightly. A detail too small for anyone else to notice, but not for me. I've always seen what others try to hide. I smiled gently, the smile of a frail old mother, harmless and soft. But inside my head, the game pieces were already moving. After dinner, I accidentally asked him to carry some papers down to the wine cellar, where I had placed a copy of my husband's financial records. Numbers don't lie, and if someone is guilty, their eyes will betray them long before their words. I followed silently, a shadow behind him. In the dim light, I saw him freeze as he stared at the documents, the look of a man who's been struck exactly where it hurts most. No confession was needed. His reaction was enough. From that day on, I began to pull the strings. I whispered vague truths to my other children, sowing seeds of doubt in their ears. I didn't lie. I only chose which pieces of the truth to show. A half-truth, placed carefully, can be sharper than any accusation. Your brother's been tense lately, I said softly to the second child, my voice like a worried mother's. I think he's hiding something about your father. I knew how fast suspicion spread in this house. Years of living under this roof had taught me. Trust isn't a chain, it's kindling. And once that kindling catches fire, it consumes everything. Just a few days later, the flames began to rise. One gloomy evening, I heard shouting in the living room. The second child was confronting the eldest about the mysterious money from the past. Every word cut like a blade. The fake unity began to crack. I sat quietly in my room, listening to their voices echo through the walls, calm as still water. I had waited for this moment far too long. But I also knew this was just the opening act. The one who killed my husband might not be the eldest. But by making him the first target of suspicion, I had opened the first door of war. In a family once thought unbreakable, once trust shatters, it can never be repaired. That night, when the house fell silent, I quietly went down to the living room. The old clock ticked steadily, reminding me that time favors the patient. I rested my hand on the back of the chair where my husband used to sit and closed my eyes. His voice seemed to echo faintly through the years. Maria, trust no one. The enemy is inside the house. When I opened my eyes again, the weak mother was gone. I was the hunter, and the first battle had begun, not with guns or knives, but with the cracks splintering through the heart of this family. From that moment on, I knew no one could trust anyone anymore, and that was exactly what I needed, because only in chaos does a killer show their true face. After that first night of confrontation,
The house was no longer quiet. Footsteps echoed down the hallway like a slow, heavy drumbeat. Glances, once filled with warmth, were now sharpened into cold, silent blades. The moment my eldest son was dragged into the whirlpool of suspicion, our family began to fracture, layer by fragile layer. But I knew this was only the surface of something far deeper, and in that dark depth, the true killer was standing still, watching everything and smiling. I sat in my late husband's study, the room where everything began. Dust had claimed it for over 20 years, the scent of old wood, his cigarettes, and time itself wrapped around me, dragging me back to those final days beside him. I ran my hand over the drawer where I had once found his fateful journal. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the certainty that the truth was drawing closer. Only one missing piece remained, and ironically, it wasn't hidden far away. It lay right at the dinner table, in the soft voice and gentle eyes of my daughter-in-law. She had always been the quiet one, gentle, thoughtful, so perfect no one ever suspected her. That was her greatest weapon. No one looked at her twice, not even me. Until that night. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but as I passed the living room, I froze. Her voice whispered sharply through the phone, slicing the silence like a knife through silk. Don't worry. I've had everything under control for 20 years. No one can ever reopen the past. My heart skipped a beat. Her voice was too calm, too certain, like someone who had owned the game all along. Hidden in the dark, I listened to every venomous word. When the call ended, I stumbled back, gripping the railing. In that moment, I finally understood. The person I'd been hunting wasn't my son. The one who killed my husband was her.
For years, she had been the invisible hand behind every financial decision, every subtle manipulation, every carefully buried secret. She never stood in the spotlight, because true puppeteers never do. The next day, I began watching her every move. Nothing escaped me anymore. I searched through old files, the copies my husband had locked in his secret safe. And there, at the end of a thick folder, I found it. A share transfer contract signed right before he died. The beneficiary was her. A chill shot down my spine. It had all been planned. His death wasn't an accident. It was the final stroke of a masterpiece of deceit, and she was the only one with a motive, power and wealth. But I didn't strike, not yet. A mother who has lost everything doesn't make the same mistake twice. I would make her destroy herself. I invited her into my husband's study, the throne she had stolen from him. She entered, serene as ever. I gave her the softest smile, one that hid a blade beneath.
"My dear," I said slowly, "I found some of your father-in-law's papers. Strange. They seem to connect to the time he died. I'm not good with business. You'll help me understand, won't you?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second. But that second was everything. I saw panic rippling beneath her calm mask. As I poured the tea, I listened closely to her breath, the tightening rhythm of a caged heartbeat. Then I did what I do best. I whispered. I let rumors take root. I told the family I'd found new evidence, that a shocking truth was about to come to light. I didn't point fingers. I simply planted the seed, and it grew fast. Eyes turned toward her like sharpened needles. She began to unravel, no longer the graceful woman she had always appeared to be. I watched her pace the balcony at midnight, phone pressed to her ear, desperation leaking through every movement. The more she tried to hold her mask, the more cracks appeared. Then, one morning, a plain envelope waited at my door. Inside, an old photograph. Her, standing beside my husband's car the night he died. Her face wasn't one of grief.
but triumph. Someone in the family had sent it. A silent ally I hadn't expected. I didn't need to know who it was. I knew this. She had no way out. The final piece had fallen into my hands. That night, I sat in the dim living room, waiting. When she passed by, I spoke softly, like a breath carried by the wind. My dear daughter-in-law, 20 years ago I trusted you, but tonight I see everything. She froze. In the warm yellow light, I caught the flicker of fear I had been waiting for all these years. The hunt had finally reached its end.
When the darkness of that night settled over my daughter-in-law's terrified face, I knew the time had come. 20 years of silence, endurance, and watching, all for this moment. The final piece had fallen into place. I was no longer the weak mother they thought I was. I was the one holding the board. All night, I sat by my bedroom window, staring out at the garden bathed in mist. The ocean wind cut through my skin like ice, yet my mind was unnervingly clear. No more trembling, no more fear. Inside me burned a quiet fire, one fed by the blood-soaked memory of that night 20 years ago. It was time for the one who caused it all to pay, not just with guilt, but with their soul. I began crafting a plan, the kind my husband would have understood. I called my children and shared some good news. I was going to sell the seaside mansion our family had lived in for 3 generations. We should all meet here one last time, I said softly. Think of it as a farewell gathering.
And I could hear their hesitant breaths through the line. Each of them had a reason to return. The eldest, for the inheritance. The second, out of guilt. The youngest, out of curiosity. And her, my daughter-in-law, the woman who buried the truth beneath these walls. She had no choice but to come. From the next morning on, I turned the mansion into a trap. Every detail was planned down to the echo of footsteps. The old hallway mirror was polished to reflect every suspicious glance. The dim yellow lamps were adjusted to stretch shadows long, warm like a reunion, cold like a courtroom. I quietly summoned a few old friends, people indebted to my husband, people I trusted. They didn't know the whole story, but they believed me. We'll stay here, I told them, not to intervene, just to witness. When the truth comes out, I need someone to see. I remembered clearly the day my husband died. The air was just as cold.
She had stood by his coffin, crying like the perfect daughter-in-law. I had believed her, so much that I blamed myself for not protecting the family better. But it had all been a flawless performance, and so I would give her a performance even more perfect. On the day of the gathering, I wore a simple black dress, not to mourn but to mark an ending. The pale evening light spread across the sea as seabirds cut through the sky. One by one, my children walked through the gate, the eldest cold, the second wary, the youngest uncertain. But my eyes weren't on them. I was waiting for the last one. She appeared, elegant as ever, hair neatly tied, lips curved in a soft smile. To anyone else, she was the image of grace, refined, intelligent, trustworthy. But I no longer looked with my eyes. I looked with the wound in my heart. "Hello, Mother," she said lightly. "I heard you're selling the house. Quite a surprise." I smiled calmly. "Yes, I wanted everyone together here, one last time. We're family, aren't we?" She nodded, unaware that every step she took into the mansion closed the door to her freedom behind her. The dinner began like any family gathering. A long table, soft candlelight, dishes my husband used to love. Everyone tried to look composed, but I could feel the thin, taut string wrapping around us. All it needed was the lightest pull, and it would snap. I raised my glass of wine, scanning each face. 20 years, I said, slowly. It's been 20 years since we last sat together like this. I'm happy. The youngest forced a smile. The eldest checked his watch. The second sipped wine to avoid my gaze, and she, the woman who killed my husband, sat across from me, eyes bright but cold as stone. I began to recount that night, not by accusing, but by weaving a story that pulled them all back into the memory. The storm, the last phone call, the missing car. Each detail laid down like bricks rebuilding a wall someone had tried to shatter.
Then I gently placed the old photograph on the table,
The one I had received in the anonymous envelope. No one spoke, but I saw her hand tremble when she saw herself in that picture. "This photo," I said, "was taken the night your father died." The room froze. Even the clink of silverware fell silent. I heard the youngest gasp, the eldest hiss under his breath, and she could no longer hide. "Do you have anything to say?" I asked, my voice low, cold. Her lips parted, but no lie could form. My gaze pierced her like a blade against skin. In that moment, the walls she'd spent 20 years building began to crack. "I was once a mother who trusted my children," I continued, "but today, I am the one who will expose the truth." I signaled to my friends hidden in the shadows. They stepped forward quietly, steadily. She leapt to her feet, eyes darting around. There was nowhere left to run. The trap had closed. Not with violence, but with truth, the one she had buried beneath layers of gentle smiles for 2 long decades. And in that moment, I saw it. Fear in her eyes. Not the fear of being caught, the fear of being unmasked before the very people she once controlled.
That night I sat in front of the mirror for a long time. The yellow light fell across a face carved by many years, but my eyes, strangely, were clearer than ever. No longer the trembling of a mother who lost a child, nor the fear of a lone woman fighting the dark. Only someone who knew for certain that this battle would end. Tonight. After the carefully prepared banquet, every chair in the great hall of the old mansion had been placed in its proper position. I did not merely arrange a reunion dinner. I had staged an unofficial court, where every counterfeit laugh would be torn apart by the truth. Everything grew from the plan I set in motion earlier, the perfect trap I had painstakingly prepared. And now, it was about to collapse. My daughter-in-law stepped in, a smile on her lips so sweet it was terrifying. She believed she was entering a gentle farewell party where I, the frail old mother, would finally let go of this house. But she did not know. Every brick, every wall here had witnessed far more than she imagined. My eldest son, my youngest daughter, relatives, the silent witnesses of that year, all were present. The clinking of glasses sounded like a countdown. I sat at the head of the table like an old queen, calmly watching the puppets move themselves into place. "Mother, why do you look different?" My daughter-in-law tilted her head, her voice the same sweet tone I once trusted. I smiled. "Nothing. Tonight is only a night everyone will remember." That was the moment I knew I could not turn back. When the clock struck 9, the lights in the hall went out, leaving only the dim golden glow of the chandelier above. I gave the signal. A butler approached and set an old wooden box on the table. The lid creaked open with a cold sound. Inside were tape reels, a yellow diary, and a handwritten letter in my husband's hand. The man who had been dead for 20 years. No one knew I had kept all of these in a corner of the cellar beneath the house for all those years. There were times I wanted to burn them and bury the past. But the mother in me never forgot that fateful night. I played the first tape. The crackling came alive, followed by screams and a fierce argument. There was my husband's voice, and my daughter-in-law's. Her face immediately went pale. She no longer looked as composed as before. "What is this?" she forced out. I didn't answer. I let the tape speak for me.
On it, her voice rang clear. If he doesn't sign, he'll regret it. I won't lose this. The entire room froze. My eldest son stared at his wife with horror. My youngest daughter covered her mouth. I saw in everyone's eyes the shattering. That same feeling I had tasted 20 years ago, now finally understood by them. I pulled out the diary. My voice lowered, each word falling like a sharp blade. He knew beforehand. That night, the person with him was not a stranger. It was you. My daughter-in-law trembled, struggling to remain standing. She screamed, denied, blamed, fabricated, but the more she struggled, the tighter the net grew. I signaled again. The old butler entered, the witness she never expected. The old man slowly climbed the platform, voice shaking but resolute. I saw you leave the master's room that night. You were carrying something sharp. The room seemed to explode into a brutal silence. My eldest son lunged forward and grabbed his wife's shoulders, voice choked. Say it. Tell me. It wasn't you, was it? She burst into tears, but those were not tears of remorse. They were the tears of someone driven into a corner. In that instant, I saw her true nature revealed, greedy, cruel, and cold. I rose and walked forward slowly, my voice low but steel steady. 20 years, I have been silent. 20 years, I let you live in silk and the wealth of the man you killed. But today, I take it all back.
My hand rested on the diary like a vow. The room seemed to hold its breath. No one laughed anymore. No whine, no gentle background music. Only one night remained, a night none in this mansion would ever forget. You think I didn't know? I was only waiting for this night. I looked deep into her eyes. Where once dwelled false, sweet words, now only panic remained. Piece by piece, secret by secret, they fell onto the table. There was nowhere left to hide. Outside the storm rose. Thunder rolled like a gavel striking a verdict. Lightning revealed my daughter-in-law's ashen face. Tonight, there would be no turning back for her, nor for anyone. For me, this was more than revenge. This was the night justice returned, by a mother's hand. I smiled coldly. Welcome to the truth. And then the door slammed shut. The night of no return had begun. The room after that fateful night felt like a battlefield. No music, no wine, only the ragged breaths of those who had just witnessed a family storm hidden for 20 years. My daughter-in-law lay collapsed on the floor, hair in disarray, makeup smeared, eyes wild like an animal driven into a corner. And I stood at the center of that chaos, unnervingly calm. I had thought this moment would make my heart tremble. But no, after so many years of enduring, the pain had been forged into a sheet of cold steel. I looked at her, not as a daughter-in-law, but as the person who had stolen everything I loved. Life can be cruel. It places the wicked upon thrones while the sincere lie broken in the dark. But life also, in some way, turns the wheel and pays its debts. And today, that debt was due. I walked slowly toward her. The yellow light in the hall reflected off the cold marble floor. All eyes turned to me. The old mother they had always assumed was meek, weak, and powerless to fight back. But they were wrong. Terribly wrong. "Mother, what are you going to do?" my eldest cried, his voice shaking. I did not answer at once. I bent down and looked straight into my daughter-in-law's face, my voice low and cold as a blade against the throat. "You think you can kill someone and live luxuriously for 20 years and not pay?" She burst into sobs, her voice shrill with despair. "I didn't mean to. I only wanted to protect myself. I didn't want to lose everything." I laughed, a dry echoing sound in the taut air. "And in protecting yourself, you destroyed a whole family."
You stole my husband, killed your father-in-law, manipulated the siblings. You think I'll let you die gently? No. This was not a bloody spectacle. I did not intend to become a murderer. I am a mother, but I am also the keeper of this family's flame of justice.
I would make her lose everything, as she had made me live for 20 years in the dark.
I pulled a stack of documents from my jacket pocket. Contracts, transfer evidence, bank statements, all prepared months beforehand. I would not stab her with a knife. I would make her sink into the mire she had dug herself. I looked at her and smiled coldly. I don't need blood. I only want you to lose everything. Honor, money, power. So you live the rest of your days as a shadow. My eldest seemed to collapse in that moment. He stepped back, his eyes hollow, stammering, "It can't be. You couldn't have done that to father." I turned to my son, my voice low but no longer trembling as it once did. "My son, sometimes the truth is harsher than any lie. I have been silent long enough to learn how to hold my tongue, but tonight I will not be silent anymore." I raised the dossier. Everything would be sent straight to lawyers, investigative authorities, and the press.
Not to spill blood, but to tear off the mask she had worn for 20 years. The houses under her name, the covert investments, the suspicious sums. None of it would remain secret.
My daughter-in-law sagged to her knees, screaming, "You can't do this to me!" I answered, my tone ice cold. "I can, and I already have." The hall felt viscous with tension. The relatives' faces shifted from shock to a hard, cold appraisal. Those who had once fawned over her stepped back, avoiding her like one avoids a mud pit. She was alone, exposed. No one was by her side. My youngest daughter looked at me, eyes filled with tears, both afraid and admiring. She whispered, "Mother, have you endured all these years alone like this?" I nodded. I didn't want you children to grow up in hatred. But sometimes, silence is a crime. My daughter's eyes shone with deep pain. She came forward and gripped my hand tightly. For the first time in years, I felt a child's hand hold a mother's, as if to say, "I believe you." My daughter-in-law tried to bolt for the door, but I had prepared for that. My trusted people stood blocking the exit. No violence, no assault. Just a single route, and she could not run. I stepped forward and spoke each word carefully. "You will leave this house. Not a penny in your pocket. All assets will be frozen. Your reputation will be blown to dust, and you will live out the rest of your life with the guilt you've earned." Her eyes widened. She shook her head like a madwoman. "No! You have no right!" I leaned close to her ear and whispered like venom being poured. "No right? I am the last person in this family who keeps a vow to the dead. I don't need rights. I have the truth." In that moment, I watched her utterly unravel, not because she was arrested, but because she realized everything she had built, founded on blood and lies, had turned to smoke. Light from outside streaked across the window. Dawn was coming. The 20-year storm finally subsided. I stood there silent, watching her being led away. Not a single tear fell from me. I felt no jubilation, no gloating. True revenge is not about defeating someone. It is about reclaiming the life that was stolen. I turned to my children. Their eyes had changed. In them was no longer the image of a weak, gentle mother, but a woman who had risen from pain, cold, resolute. "From now on," I said slowly, "no one in this family shall live by lies." Last night had ended, but I knew This story had not truly finished, because paying the price, sometimes, is only the beginning of a new chapter, and I, the mother who seemed so frail, was the one who had rewritten the entire game.
The iron gate behind me clicked shut with a dry, final sound.
In that instant I knew the revenge was complete. There were no more screams from my daughter-in-law, no probing, accusing looks digging into my heart, no more lies slithering through our family meals. Everything had burned away, and now only ash remained. My footsteps whispered along the wide, empty corridor of the mansion. This place had once been a home, then a prison of memories, and now a battlefield, ruined after the storm. Everything was eerily silent, as if the walls themselves were holding thousands of untold secrets. I stepped out onto the balcony. The sea wind blew hard, carrying a salty tang that seeped into my skin as if trying to wash away 20 years of dust and pain. Before me, the night sea was pitch black, but far from still. It roared like a beast, folding into white foaming waves. The moonlight fell faintly on the sand like a silver shroud.
After that night, my daughter-in-law had been taken away, the assets frozen, the name that once commanded respect now reduced to a cursed shadow. My children could no longer wear the composed faces they once had. Their looks toward me were now laced with fear, reverence, and remorse. They realized the mother they always thought weak had been the one behind everything, not to destroy this family, but to free it from the darkness that had bound it for 2 decades. I leaned both hands on the cold railing. The metallic chill bit into my palms and I shivered. For the first time in a very long while, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, as if stepping out from an abyss. Tears began to fall. Yet strangely, they were not tears of pain, but of relief. 20 years, every night I lived in the dark, cradling a secret no one believed, nursing a hurt no one wanted to hear. I aged not only by time, but under the weight of piled lies and the cold stares of my own children. But tonight, the burden had been lifted. I recalled the moment the tapes, the diary, and the witness statements played in the great hall. The family was struck as if by lightning. Each word cut the cord of deception that had choked us for so many years. I had waited for that moment for a very long time. Too long. "Mother, what do we do now?" my youngest asked behind me, voice tentative as if afraid to break the fragile air. I did not turn. I gave a faint smile. "Haven't we just begun again?" She stepped beside me. Moonlight fell on her young face, full of future. But something different lived in her eyes now, deeper, more worldly. She no longer looked at me as a frail old mother, but as someone who had fought a war with no guns and survived a fiercer battlefield than any. "I never thought you could do such things," she whispered. I smiled, a sorrowful smile that cut. Neither did I ever think I would have to become someone like this. But when justice does not come, you must find it yourself. Below, waves crashed against the shore in restless rhythm. I remembered the day my husband died. The sea had raged then as it did tonight. The world had seemed to collapse beneath my feet. Yet now, with the same surf, my chest eased. The revenge was over. But the greatest thing was not the downfall of the betrayer. It was the liberation. I turned to look at the mansion, the place that had witnessed laughter and vows and then become a hiding place for a crime. Faint yellow light gleamed through the dark windows. People had returned to their rooms, each confronting the darkness within themselves. The family was broken, yes. But sometimes breaking is necessary for what is true to be reborn. A strange feeling spread through me. Not jubilant joy,
but the serenity of someone who has traversed a long road of blood and tears. I no longer felt hatred. I no longer wanted to exact more punishment. I only wanted peace. I pressed my hand to my heart. It still beat, strong, steady, reminding me I was alive. I had survived the longest nightmare of my life. Far on the horizon, a pale streak of light began to appear. Dawn was coming. The first light struck the sea, tearing through the dense darkness. A dark chapter had closed. A new chapter, imperfect perhaps, but real, was beginning. "Mother, where will you go?" my daughter asked, voice hesitant. I looked at the horizon and nodded gently. "I don't know yet, but this time I will not leave to run from the past. I will go, to live." She broke into tears and wrapped her arms around me from behind. Warmth spread through my chest, banishing the bite of the sea wind. That embrace needed no apology, no promises. It was the mending of severed threads, an unspoken acknowledgement that we were still a family. The betrayer had been removed from my life, but my children remained. Maternal love, though coated in dust from lies, can be cleansed. Perhaps, after everything, that was my true victory. Not merely the punishment of the wicked, but that I still had a heart capable of loving the children I had borne. I raised my face to let the night wind toss my silvered hair. Tears fell, not from hatred or pain, but because I was free. Free after 20 years shackled by a crime no one dared to face. On the horizon, the light of a new day grew brighter. The sea still rolled, but it no longer frightened me. It was like life itself, storms and darkness, but also dawn. And I, Maria, the woman once thought weak, had become the one who lit that light. The vengeance had ended, but the journey of living had only just begun.
The night wind howled through every crack of the door, like the sigh of a house that had witnessed too many secrets laid bare. After that fateful night, the entire mansion sank into a chilling silence. No more laughter, no more fake family dinners. Only the ticking of the antique clock on the wall remained, the last loyal witness counting down the collapse of a dynasty once thought unshakable. I, Maria, stood still, gazing at the dark sea through the window. The moonlight stretched across the shore like a morning veil. The tears rolling down my cheeks no longer burned as before. They were soft as mist, because I knew I had finally done what I had waited 20 long years to do. That night, after the truth was revealed and everyone scattered like birds losing their nest, I stepped onto the balcony and looked out at the sea. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't the end of a tragedy. It was the final move of a chess game, in which I had known every play from the very beginning. Long ago, I stopped being the weak woman who endured as my daughter-in-law manipulated the family and my children turned their backs. Since the day my husband died in a suspicious accident, I buried my softness with him. I became silent, an observer, a collector of pieces, a patient hunter. 20 years, not a single minute wasted. Everything that happened at that party, the recordings, the diaries, the witnesses, wasn't luck. Each piece was meticulously placed, like a calm chess player waiting for the enemy to corner themselves. I knew that spilling blood could destroy a person, but a single, well-aimed strike to the soul could make them rot in their own ashes forever. That's why I didn't kill my daughter-in-law. I made the people she once controlled turn against her. I stripped away every lie under the merciless light of truth. I made the perfect mask she wore fall apart beneath the whispers of disgust from the family.
I didn't just break her. I shattered my children's illusions.
From believing I was just a harmless old woman, they finally saw I had never been weak. My silence had never been fear. It was strategy, letting them walk themselves into the abyss I had long prepared. The days that followed were hollow. My eldest son left with his head in his hands. My daughter cried until nothing was left when she learned her husband too had been manipulated by that woman. The allies my daughter-in-law once drank with turned their backs as if she had never existed. The family crumbled, but the truth was free, and I was the last one standing. When the final suitcase rolled past the gate, I sat alone in the vast living room. Every wall, every photo frame had witnessed memories that had long since died. The pain was gone. What remained was emptiness, so deep it swallowed even my breath. They called me the victor, but in real revenge stories, there are no victors, only the one who endures the longest, and that was me.
I walked to the liquor cabinet and poured myself a glass of red wine. Its scent carried me back to the night I first met my late husband, when everything was still pure, untouched by betrayal. I sat in his favorite chair, the one where he'd read his newspaper every morning. The wind stirred the curtains softly, as if he were sitting beside me, silent and warm. "Do you see?" I whispered, speaking to the man who was no longer there. "I did it. I didn't let your death become just another meaningless number in the past." I remembered his gentle eyes, full of trust in this family. That trust was exactly why I could never let her go unpunished. My revenge wasn't loud. It didn't drip with blood or scream in the night. It was quiet, a hidden flame beneath ashes, waiting for the right storm to burn everything she had built. But there's a secret no one knows. It wasn't just my daughter-in-law caught in the trap. My own children were too. Every argument, every fracture in the family was a gentle push from me. I didn't kill anyone. I simply guided them down a road whose end I had seen long ago. What I reclaimed wasn't just justice, it was control. I looked out at the front yard where my grandchildren once ran laughing, where joy had lived. Now, only a frozen silence remained. I had won, but this kingdom now belonged to a single, lonely queen. Me. Some say revenge is a double-edged blade. I believe it's a chessboard. Those who have the patience to play until the end are the ones who survive. And the survivor often stands alone. That night, I closed the mansion door and locked everything behind me. The garden lights flickered like the last flame of a 20-year play. I sat in the dark, my wine glinting like frozen blood in my hand. I had repaid my life's debt, but the price was eternal solitude. In the silence of the house, only the waves crashed against the rocks. The story ended like a song, without a chorus. I, Maria, the Avenger, was also the one destiny quietly avenged. When the last light went out, only an old woman remained in the vast room, a lonely queen ruling over a fallen empire, and perhaps that is the truest definition of victory.